Okay, well, we will get started in a moment. While we're waiting for everyone to kind of file in, I want to say a quick hello. I'm really excited to have everybody here. Here at this is the first ever inaugural webinar, live stream, whatever you want to call it, of Scholars to Storytellers. So um, I hope it'll be the first of many. Before I introduce our guest for today, I just want to say a few quick words while people are coming in about Scholars to Storytellers. Those of you who are not familiar with us, um, we are, sorry, hang on, I'm getting messages here that say the chat is disabled. That should be okay, but I think you can put your questions into Q&A. So yeah, that's actually intentional. So we're fine, I think. So yes, if you have questions, there should be a button down at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. So please feel free to just put your questions there. The chat, I think, is just for Krista and me. So again, welcome. My name is John Gazvinian. I'm the founding director of Scholars to Storytellers. Again, if you're not familiar with us, Scholars to Storytellers is something I started about 2 years ago. And it was an initiative that I've aimed at helping senior academics, people who are tenured, who have, who are in many cases full professors, etc., who have written 2 or 3 or more well-received specialist books, but who really want to do that big trade book, the book that gets published by a big commercial publisher like Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House, etc. Get out there on TV, radio, engage with larger publics, but just don't really know how to do that. So I started Scholars to Storytellers about 2 years ago. It's gone incredibly well, better than I ever expected. Basically, what we do in a nutshell is we coach over a period of 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, um, uh, to take you from what I describe as from a concept to what I call an agent-ready proposal within a short amount of time. So the idea is, you're supposed to find an agent, and the idea is that we help you do that, but we help you learn how to write differently, think of your story, think of your subject matter as a story with characters and plot and drama and narrative tension rather than just analysis and jargon. How to write a book proposal, how to write a nonfiction book proposal, writing sample, how to navigate the whole agent process. We now have a whole team of people that work with you, so it's not just me, editors, publicists, etc. And we have a whole network of agents that we connect you to at the end of that process. That is the full kind of signature Scholars to Storytellers coaching package. If you're interested in learning more about that, I am going to drop the link in the chat to our website, which is simply scholarstostorytellers.com. Please feel free to check that out. As we've grown, we've grown dramatically, actually. So we now have a range of products that are intended for a whole range of budgets. So in addition to the full Scholars to Storytellers coaching package, we also have group coaching now that we do, which has been going really, really well. And again, I encourage people to check that out as well. I'm typing the link to that as well. For some reason, all the links I prepared earlier are now not working. So I'm going to have to type them out fresh. But there you go. That's if you're interested in group coaching. We meet twice a month for a couple of okay. I'm getting people telling me that these links are not visible in the chat. See, I knew lots of things were going to go wrong today. All right. Well, let's skip all that then, shall we? And now we know what not to do on the next webinar. Check out scholarstostorytellers.com or join our mailing list or join us on social media. We're on LinkedIn, X, Instagram, and Facebook, or just send me an email, john@scholarstostorytellers.com, and I can tell you all about everything that we do. So you're in luck. We got to cut that short and jump straight to the reason that we're here today, which is to have a conversation about writing an op-ed as an academic and how to go about doing that. So the idea for this came about when I published my own recent op-ed with the New York Times a couple of months ago, following the death of the Iranian president. And the editor that I worked with was a fantastic editor by the name of Krista Mahr, who is joining us today. She is international opinions editor on the New York Times. So she's responsible for all the guest essays that have to do with anything of an international persuasion. And she's very, very generously agreed to join us and talk a little bit about how to write an op-ed and how to pitch an op-ed and how to successfully place an op-ed on a newspaper like the New York Times. So a very warm welcome to you, Krista. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. As I was just saying to you, this is totally symbiotic. I'm delighted to be talking to the people who are following this conversation, and hopefully can give some helpful advice and hear back from people. So very glad to be here.
So let's just kick right off. So we have about an hour with Krista. She's very generously agreed to stay with us till 2 o'clock. So we'll try to be as efficient as we can. We were talking a little bit about just before we got on the call about the best way to start. We could talk a little bit about our own experience working together, or we could simply jump into some of the kind of common pitfalls and mistakes that we see, or that kind of tips that you might have for academics who are writing op-eds. What makes sense for you? Where do you want to start the conversation?
Can I just give a little introduction to
Sure.
sort of the opinion department and
Absolutely.
operation, just so everybody kind of, I know everybody sort of understands what op-eds are, but just to give a clear kind of sense of where they fit in terms of the opinion department. So just to introduce myself, I've been with Opinion for a little over a year, since last May, and the opinion department at the New York Times is big. It's gosh, I should probably have had a number. It's a couple hundred people, and in some ways, it sort of mirrors the newsroom in the sense that we have text editors, we have photo editors, we have audio team, we have a video team. We have a full fact-checking department and a copy desk. So we're sort of like a little microcosm that operates in the opinion space. If you look on the New York Times website, if you look on like the homepage, we're on the left-hand side of the page, and it's always very clearly delineated from the newsroom side. So that's kind of an important operational thing that we do to make it very clear to readers that they're reading opinion versus reading news. And every day you'll see a mix of our columnists who are writing, as I said, a video, a feature, like an audio feature, and guest essays, which is what I am largely focused on in the international space, as you said. So,
Guest
our
essays, if I can interrupt you, guest essays are what we used to call op-eds, right? Is that
yeah,
for
exactly,
the old people in
exactly.
the room? Okay.
Exactly. So there was, I believe, I'm not making this up, that there was some research done into kind of reader awareness and understanding, and nobody really, I think the old term op-ed, people weren't super clear on like what exactly that signaled, that this was going to be outside contributors writing their different perspectives and opinions for the Times, and so that was the decision to change the term to guest essay. So that's what we call them at the Times. I'm sure other people still call them op-eds. Um, and so let me just, I would like to experiment with dropping something in. I think if I drop it into the Q&A, would that work? Like if I send it there, does that open?
I
Oh
figured
no.
out I figured out the issue is just simply toggling the thing to say send the chat to everyone rather than just to me. I don't know if you can see that. Um,
Okay.
I've been able to figure that out. So if you
So if I,
I don't know if you're
so
able
if
to see
I,
where it
oh,
says
I see.
chat
Okay,
host and
sorry.
panelists. If you
Oh
just
yeah.
change host and panelists to
Okay, does
everyone.
that work?
Well, that
Did
no,
that work?
that just came to me. So if you just change
Hmm.
the little toggle thing on the lower right that says to every, in fact, if you want, I'll do this. I'll just copy and paste this and put it in the chat to everyone.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. That's basically that's a sort of landing page for where our guest essays live. Um, and yeah, I guess we can start a little bit about, I can talk a little bit about kind of the breadth of our guest essays. Basically, our mission is to give readers a wide variety of perspectives and arguments about different things happening in the world, the news events, elections, to the NATO summit that's underway, to things that aren't necessarily in the news, but are, larger themes that are, unfolding across the world. And so those perspectives come from a variety of people. They come from people like yourselves who are, deep subject area experts and can lend that kind of lens and expertise to 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 a piece and that enriches our readers' understanding of an issue. They can be an expert could also be somebody who's experienced something, so for instance, somebody on the ground in Gaza, can be writing a personal essay about their experience. Or, oftentimes they can be public officials. We often are working with elected officials and officials from other countries to get their guest essays out into the world too. So that's kind of just the broadest sort of overview of all of the different things that we do in that section. Um, John, we can talk a little bit about the piece that you and I worked on together because I think that this, it's a great example of, a piece that developed kind of organically through our communication, and also was one that just was the kind of the right. We have an expression, sort of the right writer at the right time on the right subject. So that was it all kind of came together quite neatly. I believe you had written an email me to check in about the prospects of Iran's sort of nuclear ambitions, a couple of months earlier, and we got in touch that way and just had a little bit of a chat, and didn't immediately start to work together on an essay. And then when President Raisi, was killed in this helicopter crash, that seemed like a good moment again to raise the question of, well, where does this leave things for one of the most important questions that people have about Iran, its nuclear agenda? And so that was sort of the moment at which we started to work together. Do you have any thoughts that you wanted to share with the group about sort of your thinking there, or?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and actually, before I do, I just want to say to everybody, the Q&A is open for your questions. Feel free to start putting your questions in the Q&A now, and we'll kind of get to them when we kind of get to Q&A. Don't feel like you need to wait till the end of all of this. Yeah, so actually the way that came about was kind of interesting because I have to say, I have actually pitched several times to the New York Times over the years, and like many people, and knowing full well that you don't always get to kind of make it into the Times. But I was actually coming back from a trip in South America, and I was flying through Sao Paulo for the day, and I had this it was when that Israel-Iran kind of exchange of fire was going on in early April. And I had this idea. I thought, for a whole bunch of reasons, which won't get into here. I mean, I think that Iran has begun to second guess some of its traditional taboos around actually going full nuclear. And I thought this kind of exchange might really start to shift some of the decision making in Iran. And I wrote to my agent and I said, do you think do you think anyone would be interested in an op-ed on this? Do you think you could kind of help me place it? But I said to her, because I was a little bit jaded on the process, I remember sending her a quick email from Sao Paulo and saying, but I don't want to write the damn thing. I just want to know that somebody's actually interested, because I've gone through this so many times where I spend the day of my life drafting an op-ed and no one runs it. And that's just a really, it can be a very frustrating use of time. And she kind of responded and said, John, it doesn't work that way. You can't, you kind of have to write it. Like, you're not going to be able to just pitch an op-ed. Like, they kind of have to see it, like maybe you could at least just kind of draft something. And we kind of went back and forth. I was sitting in the backseat of a cab, like emailing her back and forth, and like realizing at a certain point that I'm spending more energy, like resisting the idea of just drafting something than I could. So she was like, look, just, look, here's the email of an editor. And it was one of your colleagues whose name I don't remember right now. And she said, draft something, if you feel like you have the time. And I was like, look, I'm about to fly back to, the US. Anyway, so I sat there in this, kind of crappy economy seat on, flying back from Sao Paulo on like a 15-hour flight, and like quickly drafted something. No idea what would happen when I landed. Sent it off to your colleague, who then connected me to you somehow and said, I think my colleague Krista might be interested in this. And you very quickly and politely got back to me and said, actually, we're running something pretty similar to this already. So I was like, okay, no worries. Yeah, this is pretty much the standard experience of like, okay, but hey, what the hell, it's better than watching a stupid movie on a flight. And that was that. And that was early April. And then randomly in like early May, when President Raisi died, I got this email from you that just on a Monday morning, saying, do you want to write something about this? And funnily enough, I had just flown back from Dubai that morning, and I was really, really, really jet lagged. But I thought, oh my God, I can't pass up this opportunity. They're actually asking me to write something, so I'll do it. And I think I said to you, I'll get this to you by the end of the day, which was really stupid because I had a million things to do. I just landed the first thing in the morning, and I, foolishly was like, oh, okay, late afternoon, I'll be able to get this to you, forgetting that there's this thing called jet lag. And so by around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it really felt like a train had hit, like a freight train had hit me. Like I could not keep my eyes awake. And I thought, crap, what have I done? Like, but I promised her this by the end of the day. So I'm sitting there literally falling asleep at my laptop trying to write this thing and just sent it off. No idea what I sent you. Woke up the next morning and thought, this is I blew it. Like the one time the New York Times asked me to actually write something, I did it in my sleep, and it's going to be a disaster. And I didn't hear back from you for about 24 hours. And then you were like, oh yeah, this is pretty cool. Yeah, we're gonna run. And I'm like, so that was my experience, at least from my end. I don't know what it felt like on your end.
That's funny. I mean, obviously, none of that registered for me at all. And if you had told me that you were super jet lagged, that would have been fine. So anyway, but no, it was. I mean, the draft came in very clean. But I feel like there's a couple of things in here that I think are worth pointing out. One is that, broadly speaking, we're working on a series about nuclear proliferation right now within the department. So in some sense, I feel like it was again just a matter of like the right piece at the right time because it's an issue that we're really engaged with as well. So I think that is maybe like tangentially or peripherally helpful to some of the people on this call to just be aware of kind of like the departments that you're pitching, what their kind of interests, what you see that they are focused on editorially, for what it's worth. The second thing that you're pointing out about, kind of your agent's advice is one of the things that I wanted to talk about like how you kind of initiate that sort of process for people or with an editor. I mean, listen, I feel like there are sort of two ways to go about it, and I think it has more to do almost with your motivation as a writer than even with the editor, which is that, if you want to write an op-ed and you want to write it and get it out there, no matter, and you're kind of agnostic as to the news organization that's going to run it, then just go ahead and write the draft, because you could send it to me or you could send it to the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal or the Guardian, you know, and if one editor says no thank you, then you can just quickly move along and get it placed someplace else. If you're particularly interested in working with the editors at the Times or at any other organization, then I would say that sending out that introductory email without doing a draft is also that's a pathway to success as well, because as you said to your agent, it saves you the time and frustration of drafting a full piece, um, you know, kind of blindly without any sort of like guidance or feedback from an editor. Um, so it sort of saves you that time. And then, you know, if the piece goes ahead and we start to have a conversation about it, it can be helpful to kind of have that sort of feedback at the front end in terms of like shaping the piece and the argument of the piece. So I would really say that, I mean, in my experience, I deal with writers both ways in kind of just writing exploratory kind of emails suggesting, this is who I am. These are some examples of my writing. This is why I am the person to write this essay. And this is going to be my argument. And, clearly kind of articulating what the piece is going to say, not just, I want to write about, I want to write a piece about Iran's nuclear program, but specifically, why the political turmoil in Iran could impact how it's going to impact the program's plans. So yeah, I mean, I would really say that could kind of go both ways.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So we have a lot of people on this call. We've got about 65 people who have joined us, and all of them are professors, which means that they have a lot to say and a lot of questions, and
Yeah,
a lot of really good questions are coming in already. But I want to start out with one very broad question, because this is for academics. This entire conversation and everything we do at Scholars to Storytellers is just for senior academics who are trying to engage with wider audiences. So,
sure.
big question. is there something special is there particular advice you'd give to academics? Is there something you see us doing all the time, doing wrong? Is there a particular um, kind of other pitfalls to watch out for? Are there specific advice that you would give to scholars who are trying to do this kind of thing, who are trying to write an op-ed for the New York Times, common mistakes that you see people making, or even just typical traits of academic writing that really you want to see kind of relentlessly abandoned for people who are trying to write op-eds for the New York Times? What's some broad advice you give specifically to scholars rather than some of the other people you deal with?
Sure. I guess I would say a few points. I mean, I think probably the first and most important thing is that this group of people in this call has so much information in their brains and at their fingertips, and so much kind of evidence that they can use in their pieces. I think the first thing to sort of really think through and nail down is, what is the argument of the piece that you want to make? It has to be crystal clear to me as the editor, and to our readers, really very high in the piece, what it is that you want to say about whatever event that has just transpired, or the piece of work that whatever your subject matter is. So I'd say that across with any guest essay, I would say that's probably the thing that I have to work with the most, with writers, and also something that I had to learn the fastest as an op-ed editor, as someone coming from like a news background, like really understanding like what is an argument, how do you present your argument, how quickly you present your argument. So I would say that's the first thing. I mean, in terms of like the common pitfalls, I mean, I would say use of jargon is a pretty common thing that we see. It's also something that's pretty easy to fix, um, but is just something that would, I think, help distinguish your piece early by just working on getting a lot of kind of jargony phrases out of your piece. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I'll try to. And then the other thing I was going to say, one other thing that was sort of specific to academic writing. Oh, well, just, I mean, it's sort of a piece of the no jargon comment, but just, trying very hard to write in a conversational tone that is accessible to a general audience. I mean, most of our readers are not going to be super engaged at the level that you are engaging with your subject matter at. So, trying to just keep it light, talking to your reader as if you were talking to somebody at a dinner table. How would you describe this? Like, how would you tell this kind of, make this argument, tell the story to somebody sitting across from you at a restaurant? As opposed to feeling like you have to put like a very formal kind of glaze on everything, which I think, I don't know. I'm not an academic. I've never written an academic paper, but maybe there's a slightly different process in academia for the way that you present your writing. So it's maybe shifting your lens a little bit there. Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's something that I'm always kind of struggling with clients as well, as to kind of actually how to do that is, it's sort of easier said than done, I think, for people who have
Sure.
been very, very sort of professionalized a certain way over 20, 30 years. I had a question that came in before this about timing. How far in advance should we pitch to you material that is pegged to particular events or holidays or anniversaries? So, for example, let's say you want to write something about maternal health that comes out around the time of Mother's Day, or you want to do something about labor history that comes out around Labor Day, or there's some other kind of anniversary. Should that be pitched months ahead of time, or should we try to catch you when, is there like a good time for that sort of thing?
I think that's such a great question. I think that it is always great for us to get those pieces early. I think because it's something that if there's not, if we can kind of like resolve it, edit it, get it all ready to go, and then have it on that day, that's just like a win for everybody. And so I think, the sooner the better. I don't know if you'd want to pitch something, for instance, today for next 4th of July. That's probably a little far out, but like maybe with like a 2 month kind of 2 or 3 month window, like looking ahead, that feels like about the right amount of time. If pitching things on the week is challenging for us, like because this is another thing I wanted to mention. Our process is fairly robust. It goes, every piece that we do goes through sort of several edits with 2 different editors, and then goes through a fact checking process, and then goes through a copy editing process, and then gets signed off by you, the author. So it's really challenging for us to turn things around in a short period of time. And so even a week ahead is a little bit tight. I would say a month out minimum is probably best.
Which is tricky because on the flip side, of course, also you have suddenly like fast moving world events as well, right? That sort of hit you, and you want that piece ready to go as well. So I imagine you juggle a lot of that.
I That's right, which is I think why the pieces that are anniversary pieces that are more predictable, we try to get out. Because a lot of our energy gets consumed by news events. We try to have things that are more kind of we call them evergreens, things that like don't revolve around news. We try to get them done a little bit further out.
I had a really good question from someone who was wondering specifically for you as international opinions editor,
Mm-hmm.
how American the pitch should
Mm-hmm.
be if it's about something international. In other words, if it's, how much does it need to be tied to the kind of things that American readers and American policymakers are kind of invested in? We have a lot of scholars who, in academia, you never have to kind of prove the kind of, you never have to kind of hook the kind of the public
Right.
reader in the same way. I mean, everything is inherently valuable and interesting and worth studying and so on. But, there are certain topics, particularly certain global topics, that are very difficult to get American readers engaged in. And how important is it to kind of play up the sort of American angle to an international pitch, in your opinion?
I think that, I mean, listen, there are sort of 2 camps of stories. There's one camp of stories that's very much about like US interests in the world, and there's a direct kind of interplay there between a news event that's happening, between the French election results and us. That's one kind of guest essay. But absolutely, that is not the rule for international in any way. We welcome pitches that are about events and subjects in other countries that don't have any immediate bearing kind of on an American reader, but that it will help them understand the world better. That's sort of how I think about it. So uh, just because the stakes, although there are stakes for Americans, but in a sort of national security space. But for instance, the conflict in Sudan, like, if there's a piece that's coming in about, the war in Sudan, that runs because it's an important story, not because it's important to Americans. So, we do run lots of pieces that do not need that kind of connective tissue between like US interests or Americans' lives. I think that for international pieces, the important thing I'd say to keep in mind is that the pieces should, however, be able to communicate why the event or the circumstance that you're writing about is important in that country and in a big picture. Trying to always kind of at some point, the guest essay needs to take a little step back and kind of communicate that 30,000-foot view on why am I telling you about this? I'm telling you about this because, X, Y, and Z, so that step needs to be there. It just doesn't really need to be necessarily something that's like focused on the US.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thanks. Okay, we're gonna go to the Q&A now. First question here is from Deborah. She's asking, yeah, it's an interesting one. She's curious about how to move from writing opinion essays for outlets in her state, mainly but not exclusively newspapers in major cities, to national media. Is there any particular sort of advice you'd give for making that sort of transition?
Well, again, that's probably not quite in my wheelhouse because it sounds like maybe you focus more on domestic pieces. Am I able to look at these Q&As or is it just you able to look at them? Oh, there we go. I see. Okay. Yes. I think that Deborah, like what I would say is kind of goes back to my comment about the international pieces. So if you're writing about sort of something happening in your state, I would try to translate that to why it's of importance at a national scale. It's that same kind of idea, just being able to communicate the very big picture in your pitch to the editor. Again, I don't have a lot of experience exactly with what you're talking about because I'm focused on international, but I would say that that's probably kind of part of it is communicating that like big picture idea in your pitch, which if you were, like if you were like, for instance, pitching something to the Daily Breeze in California, which is like my small hometown local paper, like you would be talking about it as from a California issue, as a California perspective, or a South Bay perspective.
Um, maybe frozen. I hope others can hear. Can everyone hear Krista, or is she frozen? Can you hear me? I hope the problem is not on my end. Okay. So it's just, okay. So if Krista's the only one who's frozen, okay, hopefully that'll unfreeze in a moment. Thank you, Rebecca, for being so quick to let me know what's going on. All right. Text her quickly and get this sorted out. Ah, you're back. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Yes.
Yeah,
I don't know what
that
happened
was
there.
weird.
I
Okay.
apologize. It wouldn't be a
Okay.
webinar if something didn't get screwed up. But yes, we could continue
Exactly.
talking about the Daily Breeze.
I was just saying, like that would be one very specific. You'd be talking about what was important in California versus what was important from a national perspective. That was all. Just to finish answering Deborah's question.
I can kind of go both ways. I mean, actually, Deborah, one of the first op-eds I ever did a couple of years ago was for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I wrote about specifically some of the first American newspapers that covered Iran in the 1720s that were published in Philadelphia. And I forget how I even tied that to a kind of contemporary news peg. But sometimes national stories can have a kind of local dimension. So this stuff can be very fluid and kind of go in both directions. Benjamin, your question, I guess we sort of touched on that approach, whether you approach an editor with just an idea or instead of with a full draft essay. So I think maybe we'll skip that one since we already kind of touched on that. We have a question here that I get a lot. I hear this question a lot. Do pitches sent to the general email actually have a chance, or is it better to contact a specific editor? If the latter, how do you figure out who to pitch? There's a lot of you. And every time I've ever had to pitch the New York Times, there's always somebody new. You guys also kind of rotate a lot, I find, right? So,
Yeah.
people don't seem to actually be in these positions for more than a couple of years. So it's kind of like, how do you even cultivate
Yeah.
a relationship with an editor? I mean, the sense we have is that kind of the general inbox is like, God, is anyone even looking at this? Like,
People are. People
okay.
are. I can attest to the fact that people are. There's the sort of team of people who go through that and they then forward things onto the editors who are the kind of point people for those subjects. So those do go to human beings. The human beings do read those. And I would say, listen, I mean, it's always better to contact an editor directly, right? And I would say the best way to do that is just to try to do a little bit of sleuthing. I mean, as a somebody who freelanced for a long time, just do a little poking around, in our kind of staff page, figure out who has the job that you are kind of most suited to, whether this is the culture person or this is the kind of, politics person, or me, international, and then, just figure out what their name is and like use the naming convention for the New York Times. So like mine is, it's like, Krista.Mahr at NewYorkTimes.com. So like, there's your formula, and then just give it a try. That's what I always did, because there's no list of, everybody's a contact. I don't think most people have their emails listed on their bios on the staff page. I don't think. I could be wrong about that.
Your inbox though must be just, I mean, inundated, right? I mean, you must get like email after email after email. How do we get your attention? So this is a slightly different question from like, how do you craft a good pitch and whatever? How do we
Yeah.
get you to even notice and to look? Because I imagine your attention span must be just pulled all day long in so many different directions.
Yeah, I mean, well, listen, I will say that the department kind of ethos and is to respond to every email. So, I don't not respond to emails. It might not happen immediately. It might take me a week. It might take me 2 weeks to read your email, but I will read it. So in that sense, I mean, you don't really have to get my attention, in the sense that I will read and respond to your email, as will every editor that I know of in my department. But I do think, maybe to my point earlier about, a draft versus a idea and written in an email, it can be easier sometimes to engage with an exploratory email than a 2,000 word draft. So, to me, workflow wise, that sometimes works a little bit better, because then I have a clear idea and I can get back to somebody a little bit faster.
Yeah, and I have to say, you are very responsive. I will say that. Krista's very good at replying to emails. So,
Thank you.
we
I
have a
try.
question saying, how would you characterize the similarities and or differences between a New York Times guest essay and a piece for the conversation?
Gosh, I'm sorry. I'm not going to be a good person to edit to answer that question. I am familiar with the conversation, but I don't read it deeply in a way that I can intelligently answer that question. I'm sorry. I wish I could.
No
The
problem.
conversation is a platform for academics to write on their subjects, right? Is
Mhm.
it, or was it conceived as that?
My
And has it
understanding.
changed?
Katrina, if you want to follow up with your question, but otherwise we're going to keep moving because there's so many questions. Julie is asking, I suspect that all of us are regular readers of the Times guest essays and very grateful for what you do. She's especially interested in what distinguishes those you accept from those you don't. What mistakes do you regularly see in pitches? What makes you want to say? I feel like we've mostly covered this, but if there's something you want to add to that, please do. Otherwise, we'll just move on to the next question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just go back to that kind of adage of, we're looking for, the right writer at the right moment, writing on the right subject. And that can be a little bit of like chemistry that is sometimes within the writer's control and sometimes not. I mean, a lot of times we'll say no to essays that are wonderful essays, but they just aren't something that we can tackle that particular week or month, so um, that's just the truth of a limited space and a lot of exceedingly good writers out there in the world.
We have a very good question about length. I don't think we've touched on this. So, what's an acceptable length? All of us, I think I'll say this, I'm a historian, so I'm inherently long-winded. Sometimes some other academics are also known for being long-winded occasionally. So how do we handle that? Because it's really short. You guys don't, they're short pieces,
They're
right?
short.
What's a good length to aim for?
I mean, this is a hard truth. The best guest essays are about 1,000 words. And, I know that doesn't, I know nobody wants to hear that, but the truth is that's how they read the best. It is like kind of the sweet spot for us. So we will accept a pitch, or like we'll accept an essay and run essays anywhere from 900 to 1,400 words. But once you get into the sort of 1,400 and 1,500 word territory, it gets, you know, things tend to feel like they're not as tight and well formed as they could be. That said, we do run some longer essays, and if an essay is, for instance, the cover of Sunday Opinion, those are much longer. They're 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 words. So we do run some longer pieces.
Yes, in academia, 1,500 words is also known as clearing your throat. So I hope you guys
All right.
all heard that. Get to the point, get really succinct, and be very efficient with the points you want to make. Before I go to the next question, I want to say very quickly, if you're enjoying this, I'm hoping to do way more of these live streams and webinars over the coming weeks and months. ideas that I have are getting an agent, getting an editor from a major publisher, writers who have made the transition successfully to writing for trade. But I'm really open to your ideas about what other kinds of guests you also want us to have on these kinds of live streams. So if you have people that you'd love for me to get, or types of people you want me to get, please also put that in the Q&A. I would love to hear that as well. We have a question from Grace. Is the New York Times interested in US-Mexico border issues, the human stories that our nation needs to read about now?
Absolutely. It is not my particular, we have a editor who works on immigration stories. So this isn't actually something I help cover Mexico. We have an editor in Mexico City, but I'm not engaging as much on kind of like the US immigration story. So we do cover that. I absolutely agree with you. It's a vital issue always, and especially right now in this sort of political moment. So answer is absolutely yes.
Great. David's asking, how do we know what particular departments within op-ed are, or guest essays, are currently interested in? Or should you just go with your own interests and expertise and just see what happens? What if there isn't a tight match between the section, the op-ed section, and our interests? Should we just move on?
I think that I mean, you do you, as the as the kids say. I mean, you just have to bring what you know best, and I mean that's what makes the strongest essays. So, I think you should definitely, not worry too much about what editors might have their eyes on at a particular moment. Pitch your best version of your essay, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, there are a lot of outlets out there that might have a slightly different kind of composition of interest in editors and tastes.
A couple of really good questions coming up. One from Issa, who's asking, I love this question. How acceptable is it to dive into just a little bit into academic and political theories? Is it better to kind of put those at the end or the beginning, or just to avoid that altogether? Because I do feel that when I'm doing my coaching, I always say to people, it's okay. People are interested in hearing academic theories. It's just you have to be able to make it digestible and enjoyable and kind of engaging. It's not like, you just have to do storytelling. It's okay. But like, how much of that do you think your readers are actually interested in seeing?
I think there's a place for it. I think that it isn't, it shouldn't probably be the thrust of the whole piece, as you say, but I think that it's definitely, it's, an entire essay structured around sort of competing academic theories may not quite work for us unless it's sort of in the cultural conversation at that moment for some reason. But certainly, if you're writing an essay that is about something and then you want to delve into that a little bit kind of lower down in the piece, I think that that's not disqualifying in any way and could certainly enrich the piece and if it's done the right way.
Also, another really good question from Nathaniel, who says, my experience is that my op-eds that get accepted, the ones that get accepted, tend to be very unequivocal in their stance, which is a departure from academic writing, where we have to be careful about qualifications, complexities, etc. It's not just a stylistic issue, but a substantive issue. In other words, should we be polemical? Or because that goes against how a lot of academics like to write.
I think no. I think the answer is no. I think that we do run pieces that kind of sit at extreme ends of the ideological spectrum, and we run everything in between as well. And I would say, one of the things that we are super, super careful about is that, we, as I think I mentioned earlier, have a very thorough fact checking process. This isn't a space for people to kind of air unsubstantiated claims. Everything that is in the guest essay has to be fact, not, it is opinionated fact. It can be, making an argument, but it's not, it's based in reality. So that to us is extremely important, even with more kind of extreme arguments. But anyway, to answer your question, I think that you have to have a guest essay by its nature has to have a point of view. It has to have be making a reflecting on something in the world. It has to have an opinion and a voice, but it does not have to have a kind of embrace an extreme stance in any way.
Right. Joshua is asking if there's a way to figure out which opinion editor to pitch to. He says that Kathleen Kingsbury and Patrick Healy are the only ones listed on the masthead, but of course there are many of you. Is there a quick, rough and ready way of figuring out like who's going to actually like? It's a good question. I had the same question actually once upon a time. Who's going to be
Yeah,
interested in my
that who's going to be,
right?
sorry?
Like who's going to be interested in my kind of area, for example, right?
Well, I think, like I said earlier, I think like it's just a little bit of because there isn't a I mean, all of us, yeah, there are only a couple people listed on the masthead. If you go kind of like dig around in our in the bios of the people who work at the Times, I think you'd be able to get a little bit more information. I do not have that page like handy for you, but you should be able to get a little bit more information if you look online. But yeah, Kathleen Kingsbury is the opinion editor, and Patrick is her deputy. So they're the two sort of you can go to them, you can try them, but they're busier people than I am
Yeah, I don't
and the rest
recommend.
of us.
I don't know if that would be best practice necessarily. I'm going to lump the next two questions together because they're pretty similar. Because I think we touched on the length issue earlier. But both Harvey and Nahid are both asking kind of, this is a classic question. Can you submit your op-ed to multiple publications at once? How long should you wait to get a response? In fact, I have my own little anecdote about this from 2009, the first time I ever pitched the New York Times. There's at the time, pretty obscure, there was a obscure Presbyterian missionary from 1909 who died, a guy named Howard Baskerville, 24 years old. He went to Iran, signed up for the Constitutional Revolution, got himself killed. Very few people knew about it. It was when Obama had just got elected. It was 2009. It was April. It was the 100-year anniversary of that. And Obama had all these rhetorical outreaches to Iran. And I came up with this idea that he could use Baskerville as a really good idea because Baskerville is a kind of hero to Iran, to Iranians even today. There's a bust of him in the museum in Tabriz in Iran, for example. And I pitched what I thought was a really cool story about how, Obama could use the 100-year anniversary of Baskerville to kind of, and I didn't hear anything back. And after about a day or two, I kind of, I didn't want to lose because it was an anniversary. I didn't want to like lose the opportunity for it. So I did it for the Huffington Post instead, which those of you who know who've written for them, they basically take anything. So it was great. And literally right after it went up on the Huffington Post, New York Times got back to me and they said, we'd love to run this. And it was so frustrating. And actually, I'll even say this, and I don't mean this to sound whatever, but like a month later, the New York Times ran a piece by someone else that kind of said the same thing, so it was kind of like, they obviously really wanted that. So yeah, like how long do you wait? Because especially if it's something timely, do you just sit on your hands forever? I mean,
No, I would just say in an email what you intend to do. That would be the clear. I think that's the clearest way to do it. If you have something that you think is timely and is going to generate interest, I would say, I'm offering you this piece. You could do one of two things. You could say in the email, please let me know by the Friday, and then I'm going to move on with it. Or you could send the initial email and then send a nudge the next day saying, are you interested in this? If not, I'm going to move on. I think it's courtesy, not, I mean, it's your piece. You can do what you want. It's sort of courtesy not to pitch multiple outlets at the same time. Not suggesting that's what you did, John, but just in general, like just because it gets into these complicating situations, for everybody. So it's just easier personally, I think, and speaking as somebody who has pitched many editors myself, like just kind of go one at a time and just, give people parameters if you want to move on quickly. We have people do that all the time. And we, 9 times out of 10, we're able to get back to people in the amount of time that they've asked.
right. It's got a question from David. Let's say you've got a book coming out in 3 or 6 months and you think the topic would be a good guest essay. How common is it to contact an editor to pitch an op-ed that's drawn from the book? I do sometimes see a line that says an essay has been excerpted or drawn from a forthcoming book. Does it help if one has a big trade publisher behind the book? And I think in addition to that, I would also say, as someone who's has some experience with a couple of trade books, those of you who are publishing trade books with a big trade publisher, your publicist and your editor can be a tremendous resource for that, and your agent, and everyone. You suddenly have a whole team of people it's one of the real advantages of writing a trade book, actually, is that you can get people who have relationships with New York Times editors, who can try to get things published. But how do you guys receive that? Is there almost a higher bar for that? Are you like a little bit sort of like reluctant to sort of be helping people with their publicity, or do you feel like, hey, if it's a
Oh no.
good piece, it's a good piece?
Oh no, no. I mean, we run both pieces from that are excerpts ahead of books that are coming out. I mean, the main thing for us is that if we're going to excerpt a book or run something based on a book, we have to do it before the book publication. We have a case this week with a piece like that coming out of Europe. So we just need sort of like a bit of heads up and a bit of time to work with it before your book comes out. There's absolutely no strike against it. We love working with our book authors, and on the other side of thing, once a book has already come out, we will often reach out to those authors to say, you wrote a book about this, what about a guest essay on this? Like we ran a piece about Keir Starmer, when he won, was voted in last week in the UK, by a fellow who had sort of investigated his prosecutorial background. So, I mean, it kind of goes both ways. Definitely not a disqualifier.
Right. So Julie, I think we've already answered that question, so I'm going to skip yours. Sina is asking similar question, but slightly different. How do you actually deal with editors who straight up ignore your pitches? I know you're really good about responding, but it is true sometimes you just don't hear a response, and it's like
Yeah. Um,
any
Move
advice?
on,
Right.
move on. I don't know what to say. I mean, I hope that, I can only speak for my own organization. We really, really, really try our best. It was one of the first things I was told actually when I started is that, we answer everybody's emails. It's, important to us to respect people who want to contribute to the page. So that hopefully won't happen in your experience with us. But eventually, I suppose I'm only speaking for myself. I would probably just move on if you really don't hear from somebody.
Question, is the overlooked obits section part of the opinion department? I don't think so, is it? Or is it? And if so, do you have advice about
Where
how to pitch or where to
the
pitch?
obituaries?
Yes, overlooked obits. I'm not familiar with that section. Is there a section called overlooked obits?
Oh, yes. Yes. It is not part of the guest essay section. It's a special project about people who didn't have obituaries run at the time of their death, but should have, but they're going back in history. It's a really great project. It's not part of our department. That's part of the newsroom. Sorry. I can't
All
help
right.
you there.
How important is it to hook the op-ed to a recent news event if the subject matter is generally relevant at any given time? Can we pitch it without a specific news hook? I think we've more or less touched on that, but I mean, if you want to add anything to
I mean, the answer is always yes. I just think that a news event can sometimes help things along a little bit, even if it's in a kind of tangential way. But absolutely, we run pieces that are not hooked to news events. Definitely.
let's say you have a very time sensitive, Julie's asking if you have a very time sensitive story, something that's like a big news story. Is it ever acceptable to do multiple submissions at the same time to multiple newspapers?
I mean, I can't advise it, but it's your it's your sort of show to manage. You know what I mean? It's up to you how you want to handle things. I think it's just that, if you're trying to establish I would just say if you're trying to establish kind of a relationship with an editor and then they say yes to something, but it shows up in the post the next day, that's it's a trickier dynamic, but so I would advise against it, but I mean, again, this is your work, you're writing, so you do it the way you want to do it.
Good answer. Grace, who's one of my clients, actually she asked me this question last week as well when we were speaking. Visuals. She's very interested in doing something with photographs. Is that something that you guys are? Because I know that in the internet era, New York Times has a lot of like special, sections now with a lot of visuals and photographs. In the old days, I mean,
Yeah.
the op-eds, sometimes you'd have like a visual op-ed. Was that something you're still kind of interested in, or?
Oh yeah, totally. We have a whole photo department. We have 5 photo editors, I think, on our team who sometimes are collaborating with text and doing something like that, or sometimes just running photo essays as op-eds. So absolutely, it's a big part of our department and something that I know Kathleen Kingsbury, our editor, is very interested in making sure as part of our coverage.
We have a kind of open-ended question from Gwen. She's sort of saying, can you say a bit more about the structure of a good op-ed or guest essay?
Mhm.
Something similar to John's regarding a pressing international topic, for example, a hook, broader implications, deeper history, punching ending, coming back to the hook or the key moment. Is there like a formula, or not?
There's no formula, but I mean, what you've just mapped out there is quite good. I mean, you could, especially if you're, I mean, you can sort of, I can't really give you a formula, but I could sort of, something vaguely kind of anecdotal for a lead, sometimes, a sort of poignant anecdote for the lead, going straight into the argument and the bigger picture, and followed by sort of 3 or 4 graphs of evidence that point back and help you build your argument. And going then again back to the argument at the very end is kind of a formula that I could offer, but it's certainly not one that is, we don't have anything we're looking for in every essay. It's more just kind of something that tends to work.
Katrina was clarifying her earlier question about the conversation. She says, yes, that she was told by the conversation that op-eds are the place to present an opinion rather than a more kind of neutral analysis. Um,
I think that's right. I think that that's right. It should definitely, yeah, I think the essays should have a clear point of view.
And we have a kind of a cool and interesting question. Yes, this is an interesting question we have from Michelle, who's saying, do you know if there are academics or any other guest essay writers actually who have been doxxed or harassed after their essays were published? This is something that I do find a lot of my clients have a nervousness about, like when they're kind of moving into the public sphere.
Yeah.
It's a much more vicious marketplace than and academia is pretty vicious, but it's even more vicious out there, right? I mean, what can you speak to any? Um,
Um, well, I would say, okay, so I've only been here, as I mentioned, a year and some change. In my experience, none of our writers have had this happen to them. Uh, yes, that's true. That nobody, I haven't had to sort of intervene or get involved or gotten that feedback from anybody. I will say that there is obviously a lot more visible. The New York Times is a highly visible platform, and you may face sort of more feedback than you're used to, positive and negative, depending on kind of what your piece is about. So, yeah, I mean, maybe that's something to keep in mind as you proceed, pitching to us and publishing with us. But I personally have not. I don't know about raters coming into any really like worrying circumstances, despite there being some fairly controversial and polarizing stories that have unfolded in the past year that I've been working. So,
Sure. We have a question. What are some of your favorite guest essays that you've edited? Is there like a real favorite that sticks out? Particularly if there's one from an academic, maybe.
oh gosh,
It doesn't have to.
I didn't do like a greatest hits. What I did, the one thing that I did, I don't know if it's helpful for you, is I did sort of like break out links to like what we did last over in a typical week. I don't know if that's helpful or not, really, but I didn't do favorites. Where now and I've actually lost them. I'm happy to follow up with you on
Sure.
email.
Yeah, and maybe we can
Oh
send that
wait,
out to the mailing list if you want to
yeah,
send
I'd
them.
be happy to do that, and give a few examples of particularly strong academic pieces that we've done.
I'm going to skip around a little bit because there's a really good question from Devin who's asking, and I love this question. In terms of being the right writer,
Yeah.
does one's institutional affiliation make a difference? Do you, be honest now, do you feel that you're more likely to respond well to someone from an Ivy League university or something like that, from perhaps a smaller, lesser known school?
No, not at all. I mean, I don't. No, not at all. When I say the right writer, I don't mean sort of like a writer who has a certain background or pedigree. I mean more like the writer who comes at the piece or the subject matter with the kind of authority and clear point of view that works for that essay. So, yeah, absolutely not. I don't even really, we do as part of our kind of like process, look up everybody who's writing for us. We have to know where everybody comes from, but it's not like part of our screening or how I evaluate a piece at all.
Good. Glad to hear that. David's asking, when we pitch, should we include links to previous essays or op-eds? And if so, only if they're in quote top drawer venues, or, does that help to say, oh, I've written for the Washington Post before, or something like that?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to know who, where your work has appeared, but I wouldn't worry about it being, quote unquote top drawer outlets. I think that you should just, present sort of the three or four pieces that you think best represent your sort of voice and work and that you're most proud of. And I wouldn't worry about the publication or the outlet too much.
Okay. I'm aware that your time is limited, and it's not like you don't have anything else to do with your day,
No, this is
editing the
delightful.
New York Times page. I do want to say, first of all, a huge thank you to you for sharing this hour with us. I've learned a lot. I hope you guys have all learned a lot as well. I'll reiterate, this is our first inaugural Scholars to Storytellers webinar. I'd love to do more of these. Plans that I have are to have, like I said, like an agent, an editor from a major press, a successful trade academic who successfully made the transition to trade, some of my clients perhaps. So if you guys have ideas as well, I'd love to hear them for who else we should be doing these types of Q&As with. I have already dropped, I think, links to all of our social media, our website, our group coaching, etc. Do check us out. You'll all get joined automatically to our mailing list. Of course, you can unsubscribe. But I really just want to take this moment to just really say a massive, massive thank you to Krista. You've been so generous with your time. And is there anything else that you want to add, or kind of, we run through things very quickly, I know, but is there?
No, I just wanted to Joshua's last note. He just like that's actually the editorial board, which is like a sort of different group of people who are like writing the official voice of the New York Times. Like when we run an editorial, kind of opining on what we think should happen, for instance, with Biden in the race. So um, that is not. I've dropped to you, John, the place that's kind of the starting point, go-to place for people to look at for guest essays. It has our kind of official guidance on, one of the participants' questions about kind of how to craft a guest essay, what works, and also gives that kind of generic portal where you submit guest essays to that you can, start with. So, do you see that there?
Yes, I've just dropped it in the
Okay.
chat for everybody else. So
Okay. Good.
I
All
will
right.
follow
Great.
up with some of these links to on our mailing list as well. So again, do make sure you're on our mailing list if you're not already. That's it from me, and that's it from for all of us. So thank you so much to you, and thank you to all of you for joining us. Best of luck, because it sounds like you got your hands full on the New York Times these days as well, right?
Yeah, it's busy. Well, thank you so much for listening. I hope some of it was useful. Best of luck to everybody pitching and writing, and I look forward to hearing from some of you. So thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you. All right. Take care,
All
everyone.
right. Bye.